So
Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait just to like probably another minute and then we'll get started. Okay.
Now it's getting cold outside, isn't it?
Oh, no, not at all. No, I know. Aren't we blessed that we have the ability to stay at home, to work from home, or to be at home? Very blessed.
Yeah.
When weather like this.
We have like a former client who's turned into a friend of ours, and he's got a property in Arizona. And so he just phoned me yesterday night and said, I'm on my way tomorrow morning to Arizona.
he had to
Rub it in.
he had to abandon his property for a year because of COVID. So he had the terrible difficulty of having to live through a Calgary winter last year for the first time in years and years.
We had no sympathy for him. We're like, "Okay."
I've got everyone muted. And then let's just wait for very soon we'll get started. And then I think what we're going to do is we're going to have Nelda and Gil present what you need to be a landlord, and then we'll wait for questions and answers at the end. So if you guys have any questions, we'll just do that at the end.
We also have some spots throughout the presentation where people can ask questions or comment.
Okay. Oh, perfect.
Yeah. It's up to you. You could write in the comment box.
Yeah. You can raise your hand. And then you know what?
I'm sitting on a cushion to keep me higher here on my chair, so I keep sort of having to rearrange it because it keeps sliding around.
No,
I need
Gil
on my office chair.
Gil is a bit too tall.
I say someone else is a bit too short, but that's my opinion.
You know what? We're gonna start like at 11:03, so that's 1 minute. We'll just start, and I'll just let people come in and. Oh, yeah. See.
So I've been admitting people because it shows up on the screen that I can admit them. So
yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Apparently, I have the power.
You do. You are a co-host. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I am with Nelda and Gil. They have been wonderful. They have contributed so many to our group, our real estate group, in regards to landlord and tenant. And they are a wealth of knowledge. Over 18 years of real estate investment and landlording. Can I say that? Yeah, landlording. So today they will be discussing what you need to know to be a landlord. And then again, questions can be asked, I guess, during the presentation. Don't hesitate to raise your hand or put in the chat box. Nelda and Gil, I think I'll let you go ahead and get it going.
Well, thank you so much, Tanya, for inviting us yet again. We're always happy to be here. And I can't wait till we can meet in person again, because I really loved your in-person groups. There was such a great energy. And of course, the food. I'm all about the food. So yes, thank you very much for joining us. And we're going to talk about what you need to know to be a landlord. We're going to do a nutshell version because there's a whole lot to learn here. I'll just jump right into it. So they're basically 10 areas. I call this one laying the foundation because you have to ask yourself questions about what you want your rental property to do for you. So you need to start with an exit plan in mind first. We'll go over more on that later. That's the first thing you need to do. Second thing you need to do is you need to crunch the numbers. You need to do the math. So once you found an investment property that you think you want to invest in, you need to see if it's going to cash flow. And I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. And then you have to find a tenant, which means you have to know how to advertise, how to screen, where to advertise, what you can legally say in an ad, what you legally can't say in an ad, all those good things. And then the fourth point, it frequently comes as a surprise to landlords, and it did to me too when I started, that there are landlord-tenant laws for each province, and you need to be aware of what they are. And I will show you what those are for Alberta, and I'll give you a link to them as well, because we can't possibly cover all of them in an hour. We could maybe cover them in 2 weeks. And then there are municipal and federal laws that you need to be aware of as a landlord. We'll briefly go over those ones, and you don't need to know them in great detail, but you need to know of their existence and generally what they are about. And then there's the actual property. So you have to learn what you need to do to maintain it, how to put it on a schedule, what to do with your tenants so that they know how to maintain day-to-day functions, how to set cleanliness standards, all those good things. And then there's insurance. We can't get away from that in our North American culture. And you need property insurance. Tenants need property insurance as well. And we'll talk about that too. And then lastly, you need to have supports in place. You need to have the Tanyas of the world, the Nelda and Gills of the world, and the NeldaSchulte.coms of the world to help you. And you need to be part of them and be aware of them before you have a crisis. Because when you have a crisis, that's the most difficult time to be looking for help. So you can put those supports in place. I'll give you a head start on what to look for. And off we go to the races. So we're going to start with beginning with the end in mind, and it might seem kind of counterintuitive. You might think, why would I start with an exit strategy before I started? But that's kind of the basis of your business strategy. You need to know what you want your real estate investments to do for you before you buy anything, or even before you know where to look for something.
So you never start a race without knowing where the finish line is.
Yeah, excellent analogy, Gil. That was great. And there are different methods of investing and exiting and exit strategies. And I'm just going to very briefly cover 5 of them. So the first one is seller financing. And that's an exit strategy where the seller acts like the bank. So let's say I own a house and Gil wants to buy it from me. Then what he does is he and I work out. I'm going to make sure I'm reading my notes so that I don't skip anything here. The buyer wants to purchase the property, but they might not qualify for a mortgage. So through traditional methods. So I've got a house to sell and Gil agrees to my previously agreed to terms. And he makes payments to me and I pay the bank. So that's basically what seller financing is. And then if Gil, he buys an option to purchase, and if he chooses to exercise his option after he has paid the balance of the price, then the title gets transferred to him. So that's seller financing in a nutshell. There's a little bit more involved than that, but that's the gist of it.
Then there's flipping. So with flipping, you buy a house that needs repairs, you do the repair work, and then you sell it hopefully for a profit. There are a few, this is a bit of a tricky strategy, or it can be, because when you buy a property that you want to fix, you have to know that you actually know what needs to be fixed. And if you're not an experienced investor, you might end up buying a black hole. There might be things wrong with the property that you don't know about, that you don't anticipate in the expense of fixing. And suddenly what should have been a profitable property will turn into a money loser. So flip and sell is good if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, it's very risky. The general recommendation for flips is you buy a poor property in a good neighborhood, because those are more likely to increase in value than if you buy a good property in a poor neighborhood, for example.
Yeah, and I want to give you a little bit of example from our lives. We bought a property in Calgary for a really good price with a suite in the basement that was not legal at the time. It's legal now. And we thought it was a really good deal. We didn't have to do much to convert it into a legal suite. After we got the whole house renovated, we had sewage backup, because apparently there was a broken sewage pipe on our side of the property. So when I sent the city in to take a look at the pipes and scope them, the guy said to me, "Why didn't you get this fixed 2 years ago when I came in and gave you my recommendation then?" I didn't know that the owners had this problem before we bought the property. They didn't disclose it. So now we ended up with another $15,000 to $18,000 bill. And I also took them to civil court. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things that can happen with flips. We didn't flip it. It's a buy and hold for us, but I've had these things happen before. So just be cautious. And then there is wholesaling. And wholesaling is you're essentially the bird dog for the person you're who wants to invest. You're the boots on the ground person who can find a property to sell to an investor at a higher price. So the wholesaler has time to look for the property. The investor has the money to buy it. But you need to be very careful with these kinds of investments, because a lot of people who sell wholesaling courses in Canada are American. So the Securities Commission has very strict rules for Canada and the United States. And you need to make sure that the rules that you're following are the right ones for the country, or you could end up in hot water fairly easily.
Then there's joint ventures. So joint ventures has its own set of risks. It can have advantages, especially if you consider yourself to be an expert in property management, but you don't have the money to buy the properties. You can find someone who can fund the property, and you'll agree to manage it, and you'll have some kind of an agreement as far as how the money is going to split. But partnerships are always dicey, especially if it's people you don't know, or even more worrisome if it's people you do know. So you have to be very careful that every expectation is clearly documented, and you have to understand the risks. Things can go south. For example, if the person that you're venturing with dies, suddenly it becomes that person's estate that is your partner. And now you have a whole different set of people to deal with. So you have to think long and hard before you go into a joint venture.
Yeah, and consider every option. We've known people who very successfully joint ventured with family and friends. We've known other people who've had mega disasters. So yeah, there again.
It's a partnership like any other. And I've seen partnerships where the partner has died and the estate's taken over, and it gets really, really nasty.
Yeah. And then the last one is buy and hold, and that's what I've done mostly, and what Gil's done too so far. So you buy a property, it's exactly the way it sounds, you hold it, and you rent it to tenants, or in my case, I brought suited properties, and I lived in the top and someone rented the basement. And then when I left that property, I rented the whole thing out, moved on to my next property. So some investors like this because it's a safe, you can get your feet wet to start out with. It's also called house hacking, what I just described. And buy and holds, if you want to keep it in your estate, you can will it to your family if you want to, or you can sell it in your retirement. So there again, you can think through how long you want to buy and hold a property for, and it's a good exit strategy that a lot of people do. All right, laying the foundation. Once you've kind of looked at all the exit strategies, then you need to say, what kind of landlord do you want to be? What type of tenant do you want to manage? How much or little do you want to manage your investment? And what kinds of properties fit into your property investor goals? So as we just talked about earlier, all properties have pros and cons, and some rental properties are going to resonate more with you than others will. When we owned a property management business, we only represented properties that were mid to high end, and we rented to professional families, couples. That was our niche. That was one that we seemed to work really well with and that we understood very well. But there are many other people who do many other types of things. For example, we've got friends who did student exchanges for 4 years, and then they invested in a student rental property. So they rent rooms in a house to students. It works really well for them. They've got a very good niche there. Well, we also know a fellow who's an investor who rented Southwest condos in a specific neighborhood to single professional women. That was his niche. And that was for him the highest profit, least amount of maintenance, the type of people that he and his wife like best to deal with.
We have friends who specialize in townhouses and forest lawn, which is not something I'd want to do.
No, and they also specialize in up downs. So they do suited properties in forest lawn, and she's a securities commissioner as well. So she also finds investments for property investors in that area. That's, and that would be not something I would ever look at because I don't like the area. I'm not crazy about high maintenance tenants, but she does extremely well with that. She and her husband have amassed a fortune in properties, and they do extremely well with that client base. So here again, there's going to be some that resonate with you more than others, and you'll figure that out when you start asking yourself those questions. A lot of people start by house hacking, what I just described. You buy a house with a basement suite, or even you rent rooms in your house. And that kind of gets your feet wet. It familiarizes you with the laws. It's very manageable because it's within your space. You don't have to have a separate place and drive around to different locations.
Some folks do multifamily, and that can be a very profitable, what's the word? Anyway, it can be very profitable. Some folks do have their properties as vacation properties or Airbnbs. All of this can work.
Yeah, just depends on what you like and what you want to specialize in. So what's your niche? Does anybody want to type anything in the chat box? Looks like we've got one chat comment here.
Will we be sent a copy of this?
No, I want you to write everything down. I will give you access to a video. So just text me or email in the chat box, and I'll keep track of it before I close out this. Or I'll put my email address in here in the chat box as well, so that you can email me and I'll send you the link. So let me see if I can do that right now, or Gil can do it. And I've lost the chat box. Okay, well, we'll move on and I'll put it in later. All right, now my favorite part, not really, I actually really hate math, but this math makes sense to me because I've done it lots. So we're going to take a look at 3 different scenarios for crunching the numbers, just so that you can see the same property with 3 different situations. So I'll do the first one and Gil's going to do the next 2. So let's say you find a house that you really like to invest in. It's $400,000. Your down payment is $80,000, which means your loan amount is $320,000. Your interest rate is 2.85%. Your amortization is 25 years, and that makes your monthly loan payments $1,490. Your insurance is $295 a month. Your property taxes are $210 a month. So your total gross monthly expenses are $1,995 a month. You do a comparative search in the area, you find out that you can rent that particular property for $2,200 a month. So your cash flow is $205. One other thing you need to factor in is maintenance. Now, if you have a newer property, 1% will probably be enough. So 1% of the $400,000. If you have an older property, it could be higher than that. So that's a chunk of money you should probably set aside in a separate bank account so that if maintenance issues come up, you can deal with them. Or should I say, when maintenance issues come up, you can deal with them. In a new property, you're not going to have to redo a hot water tank or a roof or a furnace or windows or siding or any of that kind of stuff. But I find appliances really love to go beyond earlier than their lifespan. So you might have to invest in a new dishwasher, a new dryer, whatever. So it's good to have that money set aside. So your yearly cash flow would be $2,460. And if maintenance costs the full 1% of your property's purchase price, you're going to run at a deficit of $1,540 per year. Do you want to invest in this property with these numbers?
Keep in mind, we're talking cash flow. We're not talking profit or taxable income, which are 2 different things. And generally speaking, people look at cash flow because they don't want to be funding their property. There are cases where funding your property may not be a bad thing, but the bottom line is there's a limit to the number of properties you can fund because there's a limit to the amount of money that you can throw at them.
Right. So here we have scenario 2. It's the same property, slightly different numbers.
So this time we're putting down $100,000. So we're borrowing $300 at an interest rate of 2.5 for 25 years. So our loan payment is going to be $1,345. Our insurance is still $295. Property taxes are still $210. And utilities our tenants paying our utilities, so our total gross monthly expenses are $1,849. Rent is going to be $2,200, so our cash flow is $351. Our maintenance is still $333, so we're now cash flowing at $212 a year, which is not a whole lot and doesn't give you a lot of room for emergencies.
Yeah, and in answer to the question, should you set money aside for capital expenses? Yes, you should. But in a newer property, you're not going to have to think about them right off the bat. So if you've got a property that's between 1 to 10 years old, you're not going to have to replace the roof. You shouldn't have to replace the roof. You shouldn't have to replace the hot water tank, the furnace, the windows.
And you should get an idea when you're purchasing the property of, especially if you get a good inspection of what needs to be replaced, you should get an idea of how old the appliances are, how old the roof is, what condition it's in, so that you can sort of anticipate when you purchase just how much you're going to be spending on capital expenses.
Right. And if you have an older property, I highly suggest you get the sewage pipes scoped. Get the city to scope them or hire somebody to scope them, because that can really cost you big time, especially if it happens in the winter time. All right, same property, third scenario. No, you're doing it, sweetie.
So 400,000, we're dropping 150,000 on the down payment for a loan amount of 250. Interest rate is 2% over 30 years. Our monthly loan payment is 923. Insurance is going to still be 295. Property taxes are still 210. Our gross monthly expenses are 1428. Rent is 2200. So now we're cash flowing over the course of the year $5,264. If maintenance costs are the full 1%, which they still are. Yes.
Yeah, so you're doing pretty well with this scenario. Okay. Now I looked up on CMHC whether or not you can buy a rental property without putting 20% down. And Tanya, you'd be the expert on this one. And it looked like you could not. It looked like you had to have 20% to buy a rental property. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. 20% for rentals.
So that's why I did not put any down payments in there for anything under 20% because of the CMHC rules.
Unless you're actually living on the property yourself, you're not going to be able to get CMHC with less than a 20% down payment.
Yeah. So how do you calculate cash flow? I'm curious. Does anyone have a calculator that they use or, you know, a trick up their sleeve? If you do, you do. If you don't, you don't. If you want to comment later, that's fine too. Now we get to the fun part, advertising and vetting. And actually, I actually really like doing this because I kind of feel like Sherlock Holmes. So once you have a property, you need to do a thorough process for attracting quality tenants. And that includes advertising, pre-screening, and vetting, which is your application form and everything that's included on your application form. You need to factor in your gut feeling. Don't ignore your gut feeling about somebody, or if everything looks good, but you got, you know, something poking you on the back of your head telling you something's not right, trust it. But you still need to have a very robust screening process, because if you're like me, you want to like everybody who comes through, but you really need the documentation, need the proof to see that they are actually good people to put in your property and they're not going to cause you any grief.
There's that old saying that you make money when you purchase a property. I say you make or lose money on your tenants.
Yeah. Yeah. Good quote that I like from a former real estate investment group I belong to was a fellow who said, your life should be interesting and your tenants should be boring. I quite like that quote because I really do like boring tenants. I don't like exciting tenants at all. I have enough excitement in my life without tenants having to spice things up. Yeah, we got a good comment here. CWHO has a calculator and Bigger Pox has one too. Yeah, those are good comments. Thanks for that. Advertising.
So the first thing you want to do is write a description of the tenants you want to live in your property. Age, how many, what they do for a living, interests, activities, income, everything. This is a lot to take in, and Nelda has a document about that. Now keep in mind though, that even though you may have a target audience in mind, there are human rights issues that you have to be very careful of. So you write this down, and the reason you write this down is the next step, which is where you actually write a short, catchy, explicit title and write the bottom of the ad, and you write it to sort of try to attract those people without actually saying, I want someone of this religion, of this gender. Like you can't say those things. You will be fined if you do, but you can't use
words that sound like you're excluding anyone. So for instance, if you say this property is ideal for a single professional female, you've excluded males, you've excluded couples, you've excluded families. You're not allowed to write exclusive verbiage in your content.
But if you've got a 1-bedroom suite in your basement, you're not going to want a family of 6.
No.
So you sort of have to navigate those waters a little bit. You want to advertise on the most trafficked platforms. So we use Rent Faster and Rent Board. That's here in Alberta. I think in Vancouver, they use Craigslist quite a bit. It depends where you are. Different places have different preferred platforms. Find out what the best platform is in your area and use it. We have used Kijiji, and we found Kijiji did not provide the quality of tenant that we wanted. So we abandoned that one and just stayed with the Rent Faster and Rent Board. Those were always really good for us. Yeah,
and there again, it's different for every area. You can find out from landlord-tenant groups what people use, or you could even go online and look for properties and see what the advertising platforms are. Yeah, and ask people in Facebook groups as well. The pre-screening. This is it looks complicated, but it isn't. It's actually a 5-step tenant screening process that I have developed and that you can access on my website, neldaschulte.com. Find the best tenants masterclass. It goes into a deep dive on that area. And basically the steps involve writing out your pre-qualifying tenant questions. For example, if somebody calls you to book a showing, you don't say, do you have any pets? You say, how many pets do you have? How many people will be living in the property? When would you like to move in? So you make a list of all the questions that you want, and you have those handy by the phone so that when you're talking to your potential tenant, you make sure you hit all of your points.
Yes, you always want to have that list of questions close by, and you don't want to take the call without that list, because you will forget something that's important.
Yeah, we're all human. And then you make sure that it's a phone call, that I don't allow people to just text me or email me because you never know who you're dealing with. The person has to be able to pick up the phone and talk to me. This seems like an odd concept for a lot of the new generation, but you get a different vibe from somebody when you're talking to them on the phone than you do when you're texting or emailing or Snapchatting or whatever. Then once you have talked to these people and you pre-qualified them and they sound like a good fit for your property and you want to arrange a showing, you want to tell them about the application process. So you'll say, by the way, I have an application form. If you decide you like the property after you've seen it and you want to move forward, my application involves a whole screening process, which is 2 landlord references, 2 work references, and a credit check. And you also have to provide documentation on pay stubs or finances. Are you okay with that? And if they say, no, I don't want to give you that information, then say thank you very much and let them move on. If they say, yeah, I'm okay with that, I understand there's an application process, good. Then you schedule a time and a date for a showing. Send them a text with all of that reiterated and let them know that you are only going to show up for their appointment if they text or call you 1 hour prior to the appointment. So if they don't confirm that they're coming 1 hour prior to the appointment, you are not going to come. And that's going to save you a ton of time.
Right. Between telling them the application process, because a lot of people will say credit check, no way. And a lot of people will just, they'll take a property and they won't call you back and say, by the way, we found a property, so we won't be showing up. They won't do that. So these are 2 things that will save you a whole pile of wasted time going to the property and waiting for someone to show up that never shows.
Yeah. So good time saving tip there. And then when you're in the actual pre-screening or showing, you want to ask basically the same questions that you asked during your pre-screening period. And this is where I find population changes. So one time I had someone on the phone who I talked to about a townhouse that only allowed 3 people. Those were the minimum housing standards where the allowable people were stipulated. And she said, oh yeah, it's just my 2 kids and me. And then when she showed up for the showing, she came with a man and he had 2 kids with him as well. And I said, oh, and who are all these people? She said, this is my boyfriend and these are his 2 kids. And I said, so will those 2 kids be living with your 2 kids and you? And she said, yes. So I said, well, that's not 3 people then, that's 5 people. And she said, well, yeah. And I said, well, this property, I'm sorry, but minimum housing standards only allow 3. So, those are the types of things people try and sometimes sneak past you, or they'll tell you they don't have a pet, but they're dog sitting for their ex-husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend. Those are things you need to know. So the more people talk and the more you listen, the better off you are.
And when people are talking, the key is to be quiet and just let them talk. And Nelda's really good at this. You just ask a question and then you remain silent. And you remain silent a little longer and they answer the question and you still remain silent a little longer and they get nervous and they start babbling and they'll start saying things maybe that they didn't want to say. So it takes a certain amount of discipline to be able to do this because nobody likes an awkward silence, but that's where you're going to find out a lot of really interesting information.
Yeah. So if you want more information, I've got a long process and a 40-minute masterclass. You can find that on neldaschulte.com, find the best tenants masterclass. And now we're in the vetting process.
Okay, so for the vetting process, you're going to ask for 3 to 5 previous addresses. Now, this may be unrealistic. If they've lived in one place for 20 years, then that's one thing. So 2 to 3 landlord references, again, with the same qualification. Work references, 2 to 3. You definitely want an agreement to run a credit check and recent pay stub or proof of income. And that we have an interesting question here that's quite relevant, which is what if they're retired? If they're retired, see if you can get a bank statement or some other indication that they're going to have the funds necessary to rent the property.
Yeah, a letter from a lawyer, an accountant, and it has to come directly from the lawyer, the accountant, or the bank manager. And bank managers are actually used to doing this. They have a special form for that where they check boxes and they sign it.
Right.
They've got a stamp.
So not necessarily a statement, but
Yeah.
some document that indicates that this person does have the funds required. Because we've also dealt with people who sold their houses other stuff,
Or trust fund babies who've never worked.
Yeah, so there are ways.
Yeah, that sounds like a really nice existence, actually. And here we have the RTA, Understanding Landlord-Tenant Laws. So I've got a question for all of you, and I've got my response, which is my particular situation is kind of embarrassing. So how many of you knew of the Residential Tenancies Act or the RTA before you became a landlord? Just kind of wondering. How many of you became aware of the RTA after you bought a rental property? And how many of you became aware of the RTA when you started having tenant properties? So I don't see anybody putting their hand up, but I'll volunteer my information. I only became aware of the RTA once I started having tenant problems. So that's when I thought, oh my gosh, I need to get my hand on, or my hands on the RTA. And I need to read it and I need to figure out what's going on because my tenants sure do. So yes, that's, if you don't know the RTA, you can easily become a victim of it. Professional tenants know it really well. And experienced tenants are going to know the RTA also. So those are my reasons for wanting to learn this before I hit a crisis. So the RTA is the Residential Tenancies Act, and it's a law that governs the rights and responsibilities of landlords and tenants in Alberta. There are RTAs all across the provinces and the territories, but they may or may not be called Residential Tenancies Act. They could be called something different. I'm actually compiling a whole bunch of resources for each province and all the resources for landlords that exist for each province. And so that'll be available on my website fairly soon. Most of them are there.
One of the interesting differences, for example, between Alberta and BC, which makes Alberta a much nicer place to invest in as a property investor, is that in BC, once a fixed term lease ends, it automatically rolls into a periodic lease, which is different than Alberta, which is where a fixed lease ends. You can just say, we're done, get out. So that makes BC a lot harder to deal with getting rid of tenants, because in BC, you have to give them the continuing lease.
Yeah, there are also, I discovered when I was doing research for each province, there are a lot of resources in BC for tenants, not as many for landlords. So you can see that the law is kind of skewed in the tenants' favor in BC. The funding is put into tenants as opposed to landlords. So who does the RTA apply to in Alberta? Houses, apartments, duplexes, condos, and basement suites. If you've got a separate entrance, a separate kitchen, and a tenant living there and paying you rent, you got yourself a basement suite and the RTA applies to it. So if you would like a copy of the RTA, the link is on the bottom here. And I highly recommend you have that and or you have a RTA handbook.
So many landlords don't realize that the RTA exists until they start having problems.
That was me.
Yep. Yep. So Nelda bought a property and winged it. Trying to figure out the rules when you're in crisis or when you've made the mistake, like entering a property without the proper notice, that sort of thing. It's too late once you've got to that point. So it's really, really critical to know the legislation before you even get a tenant, before you even advertise.
Yeah, by the way, there are fines for landlords who don't follow the rules. They start at $5,000 and they can go up to $25,000. We have a friend who owned a rental property in Falcon Ridge when he first came to Canada, and he had it leased out by a property management company who put someone in who was horrible, and the city actually shut the property down. So they can actually go to extreme measures to put you out of business. So it's really important that you know the RTA, that you're aware of it, that you read it. And it includes just about everything from tenancies, fixed and periodic, to late non-payment of rent, rules of entry, abandonment of goods, what to do if your tenant breaks your lease, and just about everything else under the sun.
Except for these rules. So you've also got the Public Health Act, which is federal, I believe, Public Health Act housing regulations, the Alberta Minimum Housing and Health Standards. For example, did you know if your window opens, it has to have a screen? It's the law. The Civil Enforcement Act, municipal bylaws. We haven't got this in here, but condo bylaws, and the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act and the Personal Information Protection Act. So you don't want to have your, for example, if you've got a pre-authorized debit for people paying you rent, you don't want that information falling into the wrong hands.
Yeah, so those are all the bylaws. Now I'm going to test your knowledge. Yeah, legal language is hard to read sometimes. Is there an easier document to read?
The RTA has actually got some really readable.
Yeah, it's not bad. And the more you read it, the easier it gets. And then there are also Facebook groups and organizations you can call for
Which we'll talk
interpretation.
about in a little bit.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
because they've helped me out a lot, because you're dealing with a law and then you're applying it to a specific situation and a specific person, and everything changes a little bit. So we've got some help on that.
And there can be vagueness, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Okay, so testing our tenant knowledge. Dale has been renting the spare room across from your master bedroom in your house. It's the first of the month and Dale announces he's decided not to pay rent this month. We tell him if he doesn't pay, he must leave immediately. He says, "You can't do that. I know my rights. I'm going to call the cops." So is Dale's room rental covered under the RTA? Would anyone care to guess? Bueller?
No,
Tanya is right.
no, it is not covered under the RTA because it's a room rental. However, depending on how you frame your contract, whether you did a move-out inspection, there are a number of things that factor in whether or not it's covered under the Innkeepers Act in Alberta, because we have another act. So most of the time, room rentals are not covered under the RTA. So Tanya was right. Right again, Tanya. Scenario number 2, I'm going to test you again. You've got Belgender here, and his tenants contact him to let him know that the bathroom fan isn't working. And he thinks, well, I live close by. I'm just going to run to Home Hardware or Rona and pick up a bathroom fan. And he goes into their house because he knows they're working and they're not going to be home when he replaces it. Can he do this? Can Belgender enter the rental property without the tenant's permission or consent?
Oh, Ted's right.
Ted's right. No, you absolutely cannot. You must provide 24 hours notice.
Unless it's an emergency.
Yeah, and both those rules are in the RTA. Obviously, Ted knows those rules. I used to have a landlord many years ago when I was in my 20s, well, maybe a couple of years ago. And he used to say, nobody can tell me what to do with my rental properties. He'd wander in whenever he felt like it. I knew he came into my property when I wasn't there. He'd go in to fix something. He wouldn't tell me. He'd just wander in with his boots on over my white carpet. And Ralph was wrong. You can't do whatever you want. You do have to follow the rules. And if anyone would have taken him to court, he could have paid some very hefty fines. All right. You did very well on those 2 scenarios. Here's the third one. Sandra calls her landlord because she doesn't have any hot water and he doesn't respond. And 2 weeks later, she still doesn't have any hot water. And so she calls the Public Health Act housing registration and she complains. She then calls her landlord and says that he's in violation of the Public Health Act. And he's violated the landlord's covenants under the act. Is she right? Does she have recourse? You tell me. Oh, we've got a response. Yes, she has recourse. You're absolutely right. This is considered a breach of the minimum health and housing standard. You must have hot and cold running water. So you're absolutely right. Okay. Understanding the bylaws. Did we miss something? I
There we
think
go.
so.
I
Yes.
think I turned one.
Okay, so when it comes to neighbors and noise, there are some different laws that govern these types of things, like noisy neighbors, noisy speakers, vehicle noise, pet noise. Those all fall under the municipal bylaws. So if your tenant says, my neighbors are driving me crazy because the noise is so loud from their parties, or your tenant has a dog that's barking really loud and keeping the neighbors up, they can report them to the municipality or 311. And then they'll send a bylaw officer out. And if the behavior doesn't change, then they'll issue a fine. But here's the fun thing. Fines are issued to the person whose name is on the title. This works for condos and also for houses. So you will get the fine for your tenant's infraction. You can deduct it from their security deposit after they've moved out, after you've conducted a move-out inspection, and if there's money left over from the move-out inspection.
Right. So if the fines exceed the security deposit, then you're probably going to either have to sue them, which is going to be difficult, or swallow it yourself. As a little point of what we do is we make sure that the tenant reads and signs every page of the condo bylaws when we're renting condos to make sure they understand what they're responsible for.
All right. Okay. Now we're into maintenance. We're on the home stretch here, and it's important to understand, one of you brought this up already, maintenance of your home components so that you can budget for them and budget for operating expenses, which are your day-to-day expenses, and then capital expenses, which are the big ones that have to be capitalized over time or deferred over time. So life expectancy of your home components can be anywhere from 10 to a lifetime. I'm trying to keep track of the time here, but gas ranges and electric ranges, et cetera, should be 13 to 15 years. And here again, I say good luck with that. Same with washing machines, 9 to 12 years. Kitchen cabinets should last you up to 50 years if they're wood. Flooring, 10 to 40 years. Interior walls, 10 years to a lifetime. 10 years is wallpaper, at lifetime is brick. Plumbing should last 10 to 50 years, except for faucets and toilets. They have maybe about a 10-year lifespan if they're used properly and maintained properly. Electrical should be 10 to 35 years. Siding and accessories should be 20 years to a lifetime, and roofs should last you 20 to 50 years.
So a lot's going to depend on the quality of the product, and also when you purchase the property, the age of the appliances and the roof and all that stuff when you buy them. So this is why it's very good to know this going in, because it'll give you an idea what you can expect to be throwing away on these things as time goes forward.
Yeah, when we took on you, we call them reluctant landlords. So these were people who couldn't sell the properties or couldn't get the price they wanted for the property, so they rented out the property and they hired us to manage it for them. And they were really surprised and upset that there were maintenance things that had to be taken care of, like getting a furnace service once a year, or draining the hot water tank, or the dishwasher breaks down. But those are things that a person has to factor in. And once you know what they are and what the life expectancies, you can easily deal with.
The other thing you want to think about is the fact that your tenants are probably not going to have the same sense of care to the appliances as you would, because it's going to directly cost you. You can only charge the tenants if the damage to an appliance is beyond normal wear and tear, and that can be very difficult to prove. I know Nelda has had issues where the tenants have dropped change in the washing machine, and we've had to spend a lot of money fixing the washing machines. I think she did it twice and then said next time it happens, it's on you. It hasn't happened since.
Well, it didn't, but that's because I had to replace the washer. And then because it was a stackable washer and dryer and it wouldn't fit on top of the dryer, couldn't brace it, then I had to replace the dryer as well. So, I mean, it ended up becoming a very expensive fix. So, yeah.
And this is also where you want to tell your tenants exactly how to maintain things, but we'll get into that.
More on that later, yeah. And you're going to need a maintenance team as a landlord. A really good handyman is worth their weight in platinum. You'll need a plumber and an HVAC person for your furnace and your hot water tank. You'll need a carpenter. If you're getting landscaping or yard cleanup done, you'll need landscaping or snow shoveling. You'll need a cleaning crew if you don't want to do the move out cleanups. A lot of landlords do it themselves. A lot of them don't. I never do. Most of my properties are in different cities, so I've got a cleaning crew who comes in and does stuff.
So when we ran our property management business, we would make a point of doing maintenance inspections at least twice a year. Some insurance companies are going to require that, some won't. But even if it's not required, there's a few really good reasons to do it. One is you keep a communication going with your tenant. Another is we've had occasions where there has been damage that the tenants are damaged, but defects that the tenant hasn't thought to call us about. But when we show up, they say, oh, by the way, every time we throw this breaker, it switches off and we get these sparks coming out of the socket. I mean, you'd think they'd call about that, but that's a fire hazard. And when we show up and talk to them, they say, oh, by the way, and we get that thing fixed. We also can have an eye on plumbing, make sure there's no leaks or anything like that. That's going to cost more money in the long term. You can actually see how the tenants are taking care of your property, and you can sort of keep an eye out for evidence of unregistered guests or pets or illegal activities.
Right, and I've got a property maintenance inspection form on my website as well. There's the address down below. I'm wondering how many of you actually schedule maintenance inspection reports. Some do and some don't, but you really should, just for your own peace of mind.
And make sure you follow all the requirements as far as entry and that sort of thing goes that's specified in the RTA.
We're still not done with maintenance. Lack of cleanliness can lead to ongoing costs and repairs that can drop the value of your property. So what is clean for one person is not clean for somebody else. I know everyone's got different standards of cleanliness. And so what I've done to circumvent that problem is I document what I expect from regular cleaning. For instance, vacuum and wash the floors once every 2 weeks, take the garbage out every week. So I document that. I also document a move out cleanup checklist, and they sign and date it. So they agree to that. This is what they're going to do before they move out. It's what was done for them, and they have to do it too. And I also document a move out fee agreement, and they have to sign and date that one as well. So it says if this is broken, this needs repairs.
If we're missing, this is how much a light bulb is going to cost. This is how much cleaning is going to cost.
So they can't say at the end, you didn't tell me that I had to clean, you didn't tell me what I had to clean, and I didn't agree to it, because I've told them everything, it's documented, and they signed it and dated it. So that's one way to bypass all those issues. And then keep all that in your file, keep it for 3 years, and give them copies of everything too. And if you need copies of these kinds of forms, those are also on my website, neldaschulte.com. I'm wondering if you make your cleaning expectations clear to your tenants. And we're still on maintenance. And I like to include tenant appreciation in this because
tenant appreciation is a great way to retain tenants. Also, it's a good way to keep loyalty from tenants on your side. So one of the things we always do is a welcome gift, like a gift basket or something when they first move into the property. And then small gifts for special occasions. So for this Christmas, we went to, well, special occasions and holiday gifts or cards. And this year we went to, we ordered from Master Chocolate, which is the real Bernard Callebaut, who is
not the fake one,
the best chocolatier in the world. And for every one of our tenants and for a few of our tradespeople as well, we sent a box of chocolates. It's kind of neat because it's not something that you can get just anywhere, and it's a really meaningful gift. So they're all very happy about that. We'll occasionally provide bonuses for lease renewals. So you might, for example, offer incentives. So after the end of year one, you might say, in month 1 of year 2, we're going to give you a, I don't know, a 15% or 10% discount on your rent if you pay on time every month for the first year. And on the second year, we might give you a 35% discount on the first month of the next lease if you pay on time every year. And it's a great motivation to make sure people pay on time. And it's a good way to keep tenants around, because it's a lot cheaper to give up 15 or 35% of your rent than it is to have the place empty for a couple of months. And it makes the tenant have a nice warm fuzzy as well.
you can also do annual gifts. So I know of landlords who surprise renewing tenants with they'll buy a TV, or they'll buy a new appliance, or they'll paint a room for them. They'll say, you know, you want to get that room painted anyway. You've been such a good tenant for a year, any color of your choice. I'll bring in a tradesperson to get that done.
Or a gift card to a restaurant. I mean, it doesn't have to be big dollars, but it's something that just shows the tenant that you appreciate them. I used to be a partner in a home hardware store. And when you think about the dollars that a tenant is actually going to give you, you know, over the course of a year at $1,500, that's $30,000 a year. No, $1,800 a year, 18,000. And so that's pretty good money. And over the course of 10 years, that's 180,000 if they stay that long. And as a person who had a hardware store, if I had a customer that was dropping 18 grand a year on purchases, they were my favorite customers, and I'd invite them to all the special occasions and all this other stuff, just to make sure they knew they were appreciated. And this is the same for a tenant. If you've got a great tenant, you want to make sure they know they're great tenants.
Yeah. I'm bypassing the questions until the end because we're getting short of time here. So insurance, favorite topic.
So make tenant insurance mandatory. This is not something that you want to mess with. Make it part of the lease requirements that they show you proof of tenant insurance. Now, there is nothing to stop a tenant from canceling their insurance after they've shown you the paperwork when they did the lease. But tenant insurance is only like $15 a month. And what it does is it protects the tenant in case they screw up. For example, we had a friend who had a condo downtown, and this his tenant went on vacation, but not before opening up a window in the kitchen, and it was in January. And so there was probably about $100,000 worth of damage because the pipes burst and it was on the third floor, so the floors below were damaged. The tenant didn't have insurance, so the tenant just kind of disappeared and was never seen again, and the owner was left on the hook. Not only that, but Nelda has a property in Fort Mac, and God hates Fort Mac, keeps trying to smite it with fires and floods and things. There's been at least 2 times where Nelda's tenants have had to leave their property because of fires and floods.
They've been evacuated. Someone showed up, fire police showed up at the end of the street and said, leave now.
So now these tenants have to find another place to go, and that's not the responsibility of Nelda, that's their responsibility. And if they have tenant insurance, that will be covered by their insurance company. These guys didn't, so they had to go and crash with friends or pay for their own property.
Yeah, it was tough times for some of them. And then the last thing I want to mention is insurance follows you, doesn't follow your property. So let's say you filed 2 claims. Let's say you've got 10 properties. You filed 3 claims in the last 5 years or whatever your insurance policy does not allow. They can drop you as a client. It's happened to me. I had 2 claims with 2 of my houses over 5 years, and I got dropped as a client. And then I had to go hand in hand and try and find another insurance property company that would actually take me.
And they basically say, okay, we'll insure you, but if you have any other claims, we're going to drop you, which means even though Nelda has insurance, she's going to have to pay for whatever happens out of her own pocket because she won't be able to get insurance anymore.
Yeah, so that's why it's important for tenants to have tenant insurance as well, so that if there was an issue and it wasn't yours or nature's, it was the tenants, that it doesn't follow you. Documentation.
Oh,
Yeah, document everything. Anything that's legal, you need to document. I used to think, well, I could just trust these tenants and it'll just be word of mouth and I'll be fine. But you quickly find out that when people are moving out, especially if they're in a crunch for money, they're going to, all of a sudden their memories are going to be altered. So make sure you document absolutely everything. Document addendums to the lease. If roommates have moved in and out, you've added pets, make sure those are going in. If you've got a cannabis addendum, cannabis is frequently included in on new leases these days, but if you don't have one, make sure you put it in, let them know where you can and you can't smoke it, that you can't distribute it, all those good things. Make sure you've got a move out cleanup checklist, move out fees, and property maintenance inspection reports, and take pictures, and then everyone gets a copy of all of those things.
here's another good one. If you need to enter a property for whatever reason, and you put a 24-hour notice on their door to indicate that you're going to be going in 24 hours to do whatever, take a picture of that, of the form on the door to make sure that you've got that, because that's another thing you need to document, because you've got to be able to prove that you provided the proper notifications. And that's any notification at all that you have to give to the tenant, like warning letters, a 3-day eviction, whatever the eviction things are. You need to have evidence of that so that if they protest, you can demonstrate that you actually provided that information.
Yeah, and you have it on and by the way, there's software for property managers of small amounts of properties called the Tenant Cube, CUBE. It's excellent. And you can upload all of that stuff and documents into it. You can access things, tenants can access things. And if you need forms, they're available on my website at neldaschulte.com under 10 essential editable landlord forms. And lastly, support. Everybody needs support. You need to build your network of supportive peers and organizations and groups, and start with your mortgage broker, like Tanya, for instance, who is an excellent support. A lot of realtors are excellent supports. There are municipal nonprofit membership groups for residential landlords. And in Calgary, there's Calgary Residential Rental Association, or CRRA. It's very cheap membership, like $160 per year. You can call them, you can ask them questions about the RTA. They can give you advice. They can give you samples from legal cases that they followed through their members. They're a wealth of information. They're fantastic. There's Arlen in Edmonton. That's the Alberta Residential Landlords Association. There's Canadian Landlords Association. There's Landlords and Tenants Advisory Boards in Fort McMurray. And all of these organizations are nonprofits, and they're there to support landlords. Definitely align yourself with them. There are government organizations like Service Alberta. Service Alberta governs the RTA, and you can call them, and you have a problem with the tenant about a certain part of the act, They can quote you the part of the act that it applies to and tell you what the RTA tells you to do, but they're not going to give you any advice.
They're not going to interpret it.
No. So the nonprofit organizations will help you interpret it and they will give you advice. Government organizations like Service Alberta will not. They'll just tell you what the act is. And then if you have to go to court, the Residential Tenancy Dispute Resolution Service, I always have trouble with that.
That's a tough one.
RTDRS, long acronym. That's the court you can take your tenants to, and tenants can take landlords to court. There's the Real Estate Council of Alberta that you can file claims with if you have a problem with your property manager, your realtor, or your mortgage broker. And then there's 211, which is a really excellent community social and health government service. So let's say you've got a tenant who lost their job and they can no longer afford to live in your house. You can align them with 211 and they can help them with housing. They can help them with bridging supports so that they can get some help. So those are really good services to know about. And then there's Facebook groups. There are some really excellent landlord investing Facebook groups. For instance, the Real Estate Investment Resource Network.
Who are those guys?
I don't know. I heard that the administrator is like beautiful, charming, and intelligent.
I've heard that too.
Yeah, that would actually be my group. So you can align yourself with these groups. You can get advice, you can get support, and you make sure that you're staying on the legal part of the equation, though, because sometimes people will post questions in landlord groups, on Facebook groups, and they just get sort of the wild west of answers. Make sure that you always check the answers against the RTA.
Right. You don't want to ask your brother's uncle or your what their interpretation of the RTA is. We've had all sorts of people with all sorts of wild interpretations, I'll tell you that.
Scary.
I love the CRRA. They're not a terribly expensive organization to join. They used to put on, events, and we presented a number of their events. And they are a wealth of information, but you're also surrounded by a community of people who are doing the same thing you are. So you can talk to people in this who are members. Again, as we said at the beginning, you should join these organizations before you even start advertising. You should start finding out who your contacts are, who your experts are, and make sure, because it's so much harder once you're in the middle of it to find the proper advice. You know, you don't have time at that point to actually sort out who your best people are. So my advice is be connected with all these groups ahead of time.
Yeah, it's not very expensive. It's not very time consuming to join them, and they're worth their weight in gold. Okay. Questions? Yes. Do you have any questions you want us to answer that we didn't cover?
No, unfortunately, I have to jump. I have another meeting that I have to attend. So I'm going to leave Nelda's capable hands.
I will stay.
Oh, God, I was gonna say, do we have time for questions? But I know we went a little over time, so thank you everyone for staying on. But are there any questions? If so, you can just put in the chat or jump on with a mute.
Or you can email me. Yep. And I'll email you back, or you can join my Facebook group and message me. A lot of times people will message me things, they'll PM me on Facebook because they're not very comfortable about putting their problem out in the open. And I'll say to them, I'm very happy to answer your question. Could I share it with the group, taking your identity and your location out when I come up with the answer? Because landlords really appreciate those. And they always say yes. And so anyway, that helps everybody. Here's a chat question. Thanks for the presentation. You're very welcome.
Leanne, do you have a question or?
Yeah, do you have the presentation available?
I do not have it posted anywhere, but I will post it. Once Tanya sends it to me, I'll post it on my YouTube channel, which is Nelda Schulte. And yeah, same as this name over here. Okay. And then the screen that I have up right now, neldaschulte.com, it'll also be posted in my membership site, in my free membership site. So you could definitely have access to it. Or if you want to email me at nelda@neldaschulte.com, I can send it to you too.
Okay, thank you.
So if you want a deep dive for finding the best tenants, you want to know exactly how to go through the 5-step process, that's on my website on Find the Best Tenants Masterclass. And also I've got a longer course, but everything that we covered right now, but in deep depth. It's an 8-module course, and that's on my website, landlordfundamentals101.com. And it's only 6 hours in total, but you're going to feel a lot more confident after you take that program, that you can handle any problem that comes your way. You know how to handle any problem that comes your way.
Perfect, everyone. Well, thank you so much. And we don't see you, we'll see you next year with another topic. But thanks for jumping on. Thanks, Nelda and Gil.
You're very welcome, and thank you all for joining us. And I wish you great success with your landlording business. It can be a lot of fun, can be a ride. I mean, are you happy that you've invested in properties, Tanya?
I am, but for sure, landlording is a different beast, and I do a lot of the legal forms, but my husband does a lot of the other property management because you need a lot of, what do you call it, backbone. You do. You got the backbone, you can do it.
There are times you have to deal with tough situations that you don't want to deal with, but you have to deal with. But yeah, thank you all very much for joining us, and have a very Merry Christmas and a wonderful New Year. Stay safe. I wish you that all your wishes and dreams come true in 2022.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.